QTCinderella versus Zexrow in today's Pogchamps match. Zexrow starts with the white pieces and plays the ready opening, and what you'll notice is that QTCinderella does the exact same thing on the opposite side, and so the only difference is that now white can castle and black cannot. And that's already a pretty big deal for black, so black really needs to make an effort to start developing their minor pieces on the king side. And now this is a very common trick that players fall into. They place their knight on f6 and their bishop on d6, and also this works for white. And now if you manage to get a pawn onto e5, you obviously fork these two pieces. So e4 followed by e5 wins a piece, and that's exactly what happened in the game. And this is very common because, I mean, moving the knight here and the bishop here is a very natural developing combo, and so a lot of players play it, but it actually ends up blundering a piece. What you'll notice is the knight comes back here to f1, which a lot of players are hesitant to do because you never want to undevelop a piece, or at least move a piece back. But in this case, you'll notice that the bishop is now released and the knight can easily be redirected somewhere on the board. So this is actually a very good move, and I'd say this is a pretty key move in the game. And now there's this very big attack that happens on the a file with a4 and then a5. And now notice that this pawn is going to be forever weak, and it's a huge weakness for black because there's a rook attacking it, so this rook can never try to centralize, I mean also because of the bishop, but more than that also because this pawn will be hanging, so this rook is tied down to the pawn. And of course you can get other pieces to defend it, especially if you push the pawn up, you can easily get some other pieces, but the point is that now black has a very big weakness in their position, and white should try to take advantage of it. Here you see the offer of a trade, which is exactly what white should be doing because white is ahead in material, and if you're ahead of material, you should be trading pieces because it just simplifies the position and then makes your material advantage a lot more apparent. Here black has the opportunity to win a pawn by taking this pawn, and then if white takes, you can obviously take. If white takes the rook, same thing. After you trade, you can obviously take once white takes, right? So you have an opportunity to win a pawn, but instead QTCinderella does not do it and plays f6. Now, a lot of times this would be okay because rather than going for this move, you're attacking something else. But in this case, it doesn't work because usually once the bishop moves, then you can go with your original plan. But here the bishop has a very nice f4 move, now counter-attacking on the board. So now this is not really as strong. Because obviously you can trade, and then this pawn is also falling, so it's not as good for black right now. The pawn actually ends up falling immediately, and this doubled bishop is just very dangerous because now notice that the rook finds itself trying to attack the bishop but ends up falling because of the other bishop. So a bishop pairing, especially in a very open position like this one, it could be very dangerous. You see some trades of pawns, and this is another critical position because now white, Zexrow, actually ends up blundering a huge amount of material. He could easily take this rook, and I mean this is basically game over because it's check. So once the king moves, well, now you can deal with this problem and just move the rook somewhere. But instead, he moves this rook, and if he moves it here, I guess that's okay because he's not blundering. I mean, this is also not blundering. So he can basically move the rook here, but he ends up moving the rook to d5, which is taken by the bishop. So then a trade happens here, and then the bishop just gets this rook, and now it's actually a drawn position. Both players have 2 minor pieces and 3 pawns. So this is an equal position, and especially in an endgame, this is probably a draw. Even if black manages to get a pawn, it's going to be very hard to convert this material because there's just so many minor pieces on the board that can try to stop that. And so a lot of moves are played, and this is actually one of the best endgames within Pogchamps because first there's this fork, but more than that, this is still probably a drawn position just because of the fact that this knight can, this knight can actually sacrifice itself for this pawn because ending a game with a knight and a bishop is very hard to do. So, I mean, at this position, once the bishop moves, you can actually probably take and just, I mean, even lose your pawns, and this is probably going to be a draw because it's going to be very hard for Zexrow to convert this into a win. But regardless, QTCinderella tries to push her pawns and tries to promote, and she actually manages to make a good amount of progress, moving the pawn down the board, moving the king in to cause some trouble here. So she does well. But what you'll notice in the end is that there's this position where all of these pieces here on the right side of the board need to start pushing over to this side to either help the pawn promote or obviously stop the pawn from promoting. So this is kind of like the huge deal where, both players are trying to either stop it or make it. And if black manages to promote to a queen, that's probably going to be game over. Although it is probably still going to be hard to convert that, it is probably possible for QTCinderella to do that. And you notice it's kind of time trouble, just random moves type of thing. But this is the critical position. The king moves here, blocking this protection, and now the queen promotes. The king has to move. And what does QTCinderella do? The best move in the position. That's right. She does not take the bishop and plays this move instead, allowing white to take the bishop. So that's just a huge blunder. And this is just a winning position, especially once you take the bishop. This is super easy to win. You can trade the knights and just win with the queen. But instead, she blunders the queen, and from here, the game just ends after this trade because this is not enough material to checkmate. So that's how the game ends. Let's move on to game number 2. In game number 2, this time you'll notice that QTCinderella has the white pieces and develops this very nice controlling, actually triple pawns here in the center of the board, and that actually ends up being very annoying for black. You'll notice that there's this tension with these pawns throughout the whole opening moves. You'll notice from this position all the way to here, there's this very big tension, and now this is kind of where the support of these pawns come into play. They make this very nice structure that's just going to be very hard for black to fight off because now this knight has to move. It actually allows for a very nice trap, which is c3, and QTCinderella actually finds this move because now the rook is obviously trapped and cannot move. There is this kind of last resort, which is moving here, and if you don't play this right, you're going to lose. If you take the bishop, they're just going to trade. If you take with the pawn, that's probably the best move, but instead QTCinderella plays b4, and then no longer are you able to take the rook, but you still get some material. And then all of these pawn moves, I mean, if we go back, this is just very strange to see. From this position, it's just a ton of pawn moves just happen over and over again. And, usually when that happens, you get into a very locked position. And this is somewhat locked, but at the same time, there's still a lot of ways to open this position up. And this very weird pawn structure makes a lot of tension. These pawns have tension. These pawns have tension. There's possibility for these pawns to have tension. So, at the same time, although there's so many pawns on the board, it's not really that big of a locked position. And you'll notice that some trades happen with the pawns. Although at this position, it does seem a lot more locked just because of this move here. So this is basically a nice locked position, which means that the bishops are a little bit less useful, and you'll actually see that here. The bishop is completely cut off. Same with this bishop, so these bishops are not good. Same with these bishops. The bishops are basically the weak spot or the weak piece for both players. There's a chance here to repeat. Actually, you'll notice this position happens a couple of times in the game, but instead of repeating, the queen moves back here. You have a wonderful opportunity to push a pawn, and after take, you can take back with the rook and cause some more trouble. But the point is, you're taking a bishop, but instead of that, QTCinderella does not find it, just blunders a rook. And from here, it just, once you blunder one piece, your whole kind of mentality goes down. And even QTCinderella, who blundered a piece in the first game and then actually ended up to draw, she started getting into this mentality where, like, I'm just going to trade everything and, like, I don't really care about the game, which is not what you want to do, because in chess, the game is never over. It really isn't. So you'll notice all these blunders just happen. I mean, in this position, I think the game is kind of over, but, especially when you just blunder one pawn, the game isn't over. But that's how the game ended. Zexrow gets a draw and then a win, meaning he won the whole match. And QTCinderella, unfortunately, did not. Make sure you guys subscribe if you want more of these Pogchamps videos coming at you every single day. And peace out.